ICQ Podcast, episode 366, Seasonal Radio Fun. Merry Christmas, season greetings, happy holidays, and if not inclined, a great opportunity to play amateur radio. Welcome, friends from around the world, to this, our 366th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by David Bowie, Zulu Lima 4, Delta Romeo Bravo, and of course, monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin MNMRB is joined by Chris, Mike 0, Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0, Sierra Golf Lima, and Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, to discuss latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin, M6BOI, rounds up the news in brief, and in this episode, we feature seasonal radio fun that you can have. Well, as always, it's our very kind donors that keep us advert-free on the ICQ podcast, and we'd like to thank, David, Zulu Lima 4, Delta Romeo Bravo, for sending us a one-off donation, and he sends on a lovely message saying, look forward to every episode. Great range of contributors from across the world of amateur radio. He enjoys the show with his Bluetooth headphones on as he rides his mower, and the minutes fly by listening to the serious topics and the humour. Kind regards and season greetings to keep up the great work from David from Christchurch in New Zealand. So thank you very much, David, for your support. Now, David's support, along with our monthly and subscription donors, keep us advert-free. And in this season of giving and goodwill, we would like you to consider the value you've had from the ICQ podcast and, help us out along our way to keep the show advert-free. You can do this in a very, very simple way. You go to icqpodcast.com/donate. Think of a monetary value you find value from the show, and select one of the options or take one of the customized options to send that donation to us, and we'll greatly appreciate it, and more importantly, keeps your show going for you every fortnight as we've been doing it for the last 13 years. Now, talking about that show and bringing you the value that we do, let's join Martin, Chris, Martin and Frank to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur ham radio news, including ham radio transmitter on the moon and Senate support for ham radio. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys. Welcome to this episode of the ICQ podcast, episode 366, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Back in the chair after young Colin did it last episode. So I'm back in my normal role. Tonight, I have Mr. Chris Howell with me, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Martin. Hi, guys.
Yeah, good to have you, mate. And yeah, we've done a lot recently with the committee meeting last night, but we seem to be busy in amateur radio at the moment. Moving also into the UK, or staying in the UK, that is, we have Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, who has been on the talk group a fair amount, chatting to me, and you, Martin.
Just that little bit closer to you in the geography of the ICQ world. Yeah, we've been on the talk group quite a lot recently. Working from home, I've got my handheld here. I've got my handheld here, and the hotspot's on. So if anybody comes up tonight, you never know. You might hear the radio go beep halfway through the evening. If it does, I apologise, but I'll turn that down.
Yeah, no probs. Moving to the other side of the pond, Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH, is with us. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin. Hey, everybody. Great to be here again.
Yeah, good to have you. Now, Mr. Bill Barnes at WC3B is at a works meeting at the moment, and hopefully will join us as we record. So Bill will invite in as he joins us. Right, let's look at our first news story. And Chris, you put this one in, but a storm went through the north of England and wrecked the power supply network for the UK up there, and people were unable to make phone calls. This is a bit of a nightmare, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, so this was Storm Arwen, which happened a couple of weeks ago, sort of northern part of the UK. And there was a quite a large area where a lot of people had their power cut off, a few 100,000 people. I think gradually it started to, the power came back on. But I think it took about 10 days for everyone, maybe more actually, to get their power back on again. Well, this particular news story reports that in some areas, particularly rural areas, they've started to turn off the old PSTN, the old public switch telephone network, so the traditional telephone lines, in favour of just internet connections, internet lines, and people having to use voice over IP telephones, which from a user perspective is probably very similar. It's just a phone with a handset, you dial a number and you can talk to somebody. But from a technology perspective, it's very different, because if you've got an internet connection, you need to have power to power the router and the handset. Whereas back in the days before then, when we had a regular plain old telephone, that was powered by the phone line, and the phone line had its own power. So, in this case, what they're saying is that these folks that were cut off and had no power couldn't make any phone calls. To cut a long story, well, didn't cut a very long story short, but you know what I mean. A lot of people weren't able to make phone calls, and these are in remote areas where they didn't have mobile phone reception. So basically, they were completely cut off. They had no way of communicating, and this is because technology's moved on, and it's perhaps something they haven't thought about, is the fact that when there's a power cut, people can't make phone calls, whereas in the old days they would still have been able to make those calls. So of course us amateurs would have been fine, because we would have had another way of communicating. But yeah, interesting story, and it's just where technology's moved on, and perhaps they haven't, things perhaps have got worse, not better.
Yeah, well, I seem to remember with VoIP telephones, and when I had a VoIP service into this house, we were told you can't guarantee it'll work and don't make emergency calls on it. But if that's the only phone you've got, you're in big doodah, aren't you? Because if you can't make emergency calls, well, that could be very naughty. Martin, what's your thoughts?
Well, I had a Skype handset that that again it had a normal landline number associated with it, but it worked through Skype now. Unfortunately, Microsoft pulled that, and that handset was rendered useless. But it was very clear, do not rely on this for emergency calls, basically because Skype, like a lot of the other VoIP providers, realised that their services don't work in emergencies. Yes, you could call the emergency services, but if you lose power, you can't guarantee. Equally, if you're going over an IP line, they couldn't guarantee that your emergency call was going to go to a local provider. It might go through to a 999 operator in the other end of the country. That's just why they don't do it. But I can't help but thinking, one, this wouldn't happen in London. I mean, seriously, if that had happened in London, there would be so many bigwigs that would be jumping up and down about this, that they would have got it sorted a lot quicker. But also, there's a few things been appearing on the screen about this. The interview giving the exec or someone, from the power company out there giving an interview about it. It was on a video call, and his power went out halfway, which, of course, the shows on TV like Have I Got News for You, which sort of pokes fun at the news and politics, love playing that out. But it does remind me of some of the older systems, like the Ionica system, I think, that they put in. They put it in winter, and it relied on a microwave system. And then when summer came along, the leaves on the trees appeared and blocked all the microwaves. So there's definitely design flaws about it. It's a great idea. I can see why you're doing it, because you don't want to have to get copper lines out to people. It proves you can't rely on these services, but what else can you rely on? You can't rely on even in London, you can't rely on mobiles because the coverage is that patchy. But then again, if you've got a power cut and you've got no power to the cell site or the site where the cell site is talking to, and considering the cell sites lose a lot of power, what's your alternative? You sort of see on social media groups running immense amounts of power on things like PMR 446 and stuff. We won't get into the legalities of that, but people do. But what's your alternative? The only thing you really could do is have something like a 446 service, or something where people could get relatively cheap radios, or points in the local town that you could perhaps go to. Like, this place have got access to emergency radios or something. I don't know, but the only way you can really do it is with radio, isn't it? Unless BT or whoever are going to put the POTS lines back in, the PSTN lines back in.
Well, I don't think they'll ever do that. But the old PSTN lines, they run on 50 volts from what I remember, and they had in most telephone exchanges, there were lots of batteries in the basement, so if the power went out, you switch over onto 50 volts DC from the exchange.
So let me ask you a question there. I mean, my phone line that comes to my house, the voice side of it is a separate line, and I do get the 50 volts coming in from, in my case, it comes through OpenReach, which is like they look after the lines on behalf of BT. But the line, as I understand it, is VoIP from the point of view, if you try and use a fax machine or a dial-up modem through that line, it won't work because of the way that it's compressed. But I'm presuming it's VoIP from the exchange as opposed to VoIP, because there's no technology in my house that's generating the VoIP signal. So I'm guessing it's VoIP from the exchange.
Yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like it. And a lot of this has moved on in the last few years. There's, that's why the cost of phone calls has dropped significantly, and you can ring it halfway around the world on a telephone these days because VoIP is makes it cheaper to do. But there are some concerns, as you well say, Martin, and that's a frightener when that people can lose mobile phone connection. So
I've just done a search, Martin, on the internet, and I just found an article from British Telecom or BT, and they've announced, this is actually a while ago now, but I've just found this story. They're saying they've announced that they're actually moving everyone from PSTN to digital services by 2025. So basically, we've got, what's that, 2 or 3 years? No, we'll be on 2020. No, sorry, just over 3 years to get off. So obviously that's going to affect lots of, as Martin was saying, fax machines and other solutions that use analog devices. There's lots of alarm systems and all kind, CCTV and fax machines and things that use that old technology, which are going to have to be replaced. Which is why they're giving us a bit of notice. But yes, it looks like there is a plan to get rid of all PSTN lines, certainly from ones that BT Openreach provide in a few years' time.
Yeah, certainly is. Moving the other side of the pond, Frank, I know this is a UK story, but with technology and phones, that must also be happening in the US, and you're a much larger country. I would guess that running masses of wire is going to be a bit of a problem, isn't it?
It is. It's a UK story reported by the BBC, but it's not limited to the United Kingdom. This is a growing and common problem because no matter how large you are, development, and I'm using air quotes, but urbanization development happens everywhere. In preparing this story, the gentleman who's if listeners go to the show notes and look at the link, the gentleman who was the featured person in the story lives near a village of Crosswaite, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, near Kendal. Now, if you use Google Maps and look at it, that's sort of in northwest of Leeds, and it's over toward the western part of the country, but it's in what the United States would liken to a national forest. That is, it's mostly countryside. You don't have large cities there, and your population density is fairly low. Now, that's a key thing because population density is on the minds of every service provider for telecommunications because they look at that as market for return on investment. The other person in the story who was featured lives near Berwick. And for those outside of merry old England, that is almost to Edinburgh. That's southeast of Edinburgh and north of Newcastle. And if you ever imbibe with a Nuki Brown, a Newcastle beer, then that's sort of where that came from. That is a coastal town, it appears from Google Maps, and somewhat developed. The reason I bring those two things together is that the voice over IP, as our other presenters have talked about, is really dependent upon this one linchpin of broadband connectivity. And no matter whether it's a large country like the United States or one that is somewhat smaller like the United Kingdom, where you have this uneven development, many telecom companies won't see the return on investment to build out the broadband capability in these low population and more isolated areas like they would say in London. And so those are kind of the economics of it. So that was one thing that I saw. Here in the States, we've had voice over IP service with a company called 8x8, the number 8, the little X by 8. And we've had that in Starkville when I was at Mississippi State University, and we had that down here in Jackson. And I love the voice over IP services. You could have it ring in multiple places, and you could just program it as you wished. And I think it was about $30 a month, which for us was a very reasonable phone bill. Well, guess what? They weren't making any money on the residential part, and they focused on business. And so they ended that service. And my wife and I just said, we're on our cell phones all the time anyway. So we sort of went that direction. And I think most people in the States, that's certainly an option that they're going with. So when you look at VoIP, which is predicated on broadband, well, what cell phones predicated on? It's predicated on cellular technology. Here in the States, my good friend and member of my portable ops team, Thomas, N5WDG, is a wide area network engineer for AT&T. And one of the things they've been doing to keep that cellular capability and their wireless broadband service out is they're having not only generators, but the batteries that are backups for cell towers off the ground, so up in the air. So if it's a flood, then their equipment's not damaged. All that is to say, this is a United Kingdom story, but it's also a story for all of the developed world, in my opinion.
Yeah, it certainly is, Frank. And I am impressed. You know what Newcastle Brown was.
I must confess, I've walked the dog numerous times. Now, are you familiar with that term?
I am. I know where you go with it. But
and if you remember back in the olden days, I ran across that little promo when I was the U.S. correspondent, and I had a pop top where a beer can was opened, although it's not served in cans, like a Boddington or something. And I've been walking the dog. Well, that was my little pay-on to Newcastle Brown. And when the husband goes off to drink a beer, he tells the wife, "I'm going to walk the dog." So for our listeners to understand what that means, that's where that comes from.
Certainly is. So, yeah, well, as I say, I don't think we're going to get away from VoIP services. Just as a very quick sideline, because it's not really related to this story, I installed a VoIP phone in my shack, and for ham radio use only, there's a little bit of a plug for them. There's a thing called
Ham Shack Hotline.
Yeah, Ham Shack Hotline. And it's a free VoIP service for amateurs. And it's a bit of fun. In fairness, in the last 2 months, I made one call to a listener instead of emailing him, which was great. And I've had a couple of calls in, but the phone is, I don't think it's something that people actually use very much these days, are sort of desk phones. So,
Martin, I have one. I have a VoIP phone, a Cisco. It's one they support. Yeah. And I've just bought a second one. So I plan to have one here in my shack and also one out in my workbench, which is off of the garage, which is on the other end of the house. So I plan to use it. And it's not very expensive to get these phones. They really have been pulled out of service in the commercial sector.
Yeah. Well, I've got one that wasn't supported by them, but works very well on their network. And I got given two phones that are supported by them, but they don't have the power supplies. But the power supplies are something like about £8 each off of your favourite auction site.
I was going to ask about that because I know a lot of those tend to use the power over Ethernet, don't they, if they get their power? But I guess you can power them separately as well.
Yeah, these ones are, I think, about 5 volts. 5 volt supply, these Cisco phones I've got. Anyway, we've gone off on a tangent. Let's move on. The world's smallest moon lander from Japan will put ham radio transmitter on the moon. Now, I got sent this one by 2 or 3 people. Adrian sent me this one. And also, Frank, you sent me this one. So do you want to go first on this one?
Well, I certainly can. There are several elements to this story. I'll only comment in general. I'm sure our other presenters will cover some of it as well. This harkens back to a lot of things that's been going on in amateur radio for just long time. And we'll have another story that'll talk about that as well. So these two stories are kind of paired. This is not a repeater on the moon. When I first read this, I thought, oh, who's going to coordinate moon repeaters? But this is not a repeater. It's a beacon. And the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, Ham Radio Club, is asking for the amateur radio community's help to monitor this beacon when the moon is not within a line of sight for them. And it's a great opportunity for us to show our sort of community spirit and to help monitor this in the 400 megahertz band. And it's an amateur radio beacon transmitting telemetry on the moon.
Oh, that's going to be fun. And then it brings a good light to amateur radio that they're using amateur radio frequencies, and it's good publicity for us. And if it had been a repeater, Frank, I know a friendly repeater keeper that might have been able to help them out, mine, don't I?
No. Don't get me started on getting things onto the moon. But yeah, it's an interesting story. How they're going to do it, I don't know. I'd be interested to see how well it works. I say it's only going to be 1 watt. So what do you need to be able to receive this? You know, we've talked about doing things like moon bounce and stuff before, and you need ridiculously large antennas and immense amounts of power. And even like with, you know, your full legal limit, massive Yagi antennas, you still get very weak signals. And admittedly, you're bouncing a signal off the moon. You're not listening to something that is being transmitted from the moon. But I'm curious as to know the kind of antennas that they're using. It's just transmitting telemetry, potentially using PSK31. So, you know, probably not that difficult to decode. I'm curious to know, what telemetry is it going to transmit? The temperature of the moon's surface, you know, the atmosphere? I don't know. I mean, he's curious to know what that's going to do. But either way, it's a great case to get involved and help out. And let's say it's any excuse for us to play with our toys, isn't it?
Certainly is. And, you know, okay, we say 1 watt from the moon, but in fairness, apart from a bit of atmosphere, there ain't nothing in the way, UHF, between us and the moon, really, is there? Well, right, a few
satellites, a couple of planes.
But no, in reality, there isn't much.
Yes. Can you imagine that? Sky TV telecom network wiped out by an amateur radio transponder on the moon. Sorry, it's not a transponder, it's amateur radio satellite on the moon.
Yeah, 1 watt ain't going to do anything, though, is it, to them?
Well, but one thing I've just been doing a little bit of, just while we've been talking, I've just been a little bit of Googling, a little bit of, actually it wasn't Googling, I was using DuckDuckGo as my search. But anyway, I was looking at the internet and looking for distances. So most satellites that we play with on the amateur world are in low Earth orbit, which is about, just double check, it's around about 2,000 miles away above the surface of the Earth, roughly. And obviously that will, you know, it's a region rather than, it's not precisely that, but it's approximately 2,000 miles above the surface of the Earth. Distance to the moon is 400,000 miles away. And again, that will fluctuate slightly. So it's a hugely further away, shall we say, than the things we normally do. The moon is a long way away. And but yeah, as you say, Martin, even with a watt, you know, I was just thinking actually how long it would take a signal to actually get from the moon to Earth. That it's going to be maybe a second or two, isn't it? I'd imagine, to get that sort of distance. But yeah, it'd be interesting to do. Interesting to see what you would need to actually pick up this signal. It's in the 2 meter band, I think. Is that right? Or was it 77's band? I've forgotten. No, 77's band, wasn't it?
437.31.
Yeah, okay. So it's in the 77's band. So I guess you might need a small dish or maybe a Yagi or something to pick this up. But it should be interesting. Like you say, not sure what telemetry they're going to send, but it'd be interesting to see what they send. And it'd be pretty cool to say I've received a signal from the moon, wouldn't it? No matter what it is, really, wouldn't it? So yeah, why not? Why not?
Well, the other thing I was thinking of, Chris, is that, you know, we talk about amateur radio, but a shortwave listener could do this, is because if you're just receiving information from the moon and say you got something like a funky dongle or one of the other, say, SDR plays
SDR
or something
plays,
like that. There's no reason why we couldn't receive on those sort of things, even if the person's not licensed.
Absolutely, I think you're absolutely, and certainly SDR will be a great use case, wouldn't it, to use SDR for this, because you can sort of tune easily, you can see the signal, you can I think that's a great example of where a software-defined radio would be or receiver would be a good solution. Absolutely.
Yeah. So interesting little story. I think we can carry on monitoring this one, and it'll be good. Now, the next news story is entitled Hoovers and Handhelds. Well, let's change it. Hoovers is a vacuum cleaner, and in the States, handhelds are called handy talkies. About just over 2 weeks ago, Rhea, I think it is, Frank?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rhea published a YouTube video saying that Baofeng UV5Rs were being banned in Germany. Now, in the nicest possible way, I thought, hang on a minute, this sounds like a little bit like an April Fool's joke gone wrong or far too early. I contacted Ed, and at the time, Ed in Germany said, no, he'd heard nothing. And I'd have expected to be all over the amateur radio press and all over Germany anyway about it, information. And Ed hadn't heard anything. So we didn't announce this in last episode. Anyway, it looks like they will be putting a block on UV5Rs. And Ed wrote to me and said, my DMR Baofeng is actually an RD5R, by the way, not a UV5R. It just uses the same case. So Ed's having a little bit of a panic on that one. Hi. But it could be an interesting one. Martin, what do you think?
So they talk about banning these handhelds, and I get to some extent why they're trying to ban them. But there's a lot of other things people put in theories online, and the more you listen to these theories, actually, I think they could be onto something. Are the big boys hurting from the lack of sales for the big radios, and perhaps leaning on the regulators to make these cheaper devices illegal? Are the regulator wanting to perhaps withdraw some of the amateur radio service because they're not as well used to perhaps sell the frequencies? Because let's face it, we know that radio spectrum is highly lucrative. If it was just about the interference and the fact that these things are not the cleanest radios in the world, let's face it, we typically just end up interfering with ourselves anyway. Why would you not ban the stuff that is known for causing interference to places it shouldn't do? A lot of Chinese electronics switch the HF band on now. I guarantee you have got loads and loads of noise that you wouldn't normally have because of all of those all those switch mode power supplies on everyone's Christmas lights that we've got outside their house. All these different devices that are causing almost immense amounts of interference. Why don't you crack down on those before you start picking on a UV5R? Come on, let's face it, someone somewhere will find a way around it. They will rebrand the radio. They will put a different name on it. They will put it in a different case. It'll be the same product inside it. Maybe you'll be buying it from a different source. You can stop it coming from China. You buy it from somewhere else. In my mind, it's too late. But I will say one thing. During my advanced course, we actually put two radios, a UV3R that I had and a UV5R on a spectrum analyzer. And the instructor was absolutely amazed how clean the signal was by comparison to one of the other people's big brand handheld radios. I won't name that brand, but it was interesting. Oh my God, this is, yes, there was a little bit of stuff that probably shouldn't have been there, but one of the big brands had a hell of a lot more stuff than the Baofeng stuff did.
Yeah. There's some interesting points you made there. Well, I'll only admit I have a UV5R. I bought it off Chris when he bought two very, very cheaply and my UV5R originally was going to live in my desk drawer at the office, and I was going to use it at lunchtime. Now things have moved on. I no longer have a desk job, so that doesn't happen. But I've never found it to be that much problematical. And the other thing is that how many of these radios they checked? You check one, okay, maybe you get the odd one that's faulty, but I wonder how many they've actually checked. Frank, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I know the states hate Balfangs with a vengeance, don't they?
Well, there's certainly some antipathy by some. Now, at the risk of listener revolt over here in the States, I have a UV5R. It's about 15 feet from me. It's in a small library printer closet in a cabinet, and it's an APRS iGate for a big APRS digipeater that's on a water tower about a mile away. And so it sits comfortably in its charger and is connected to a small PC. And, I don't know what the issues are. We don't seem to get a lot of packet collisions and things like that. So it's in the same general vicinity as my ham shack. And I've not received or seen spurs or, other things that it transmits APRS packets periodically. That's not a laboratory test. It's a practical real world thing. I gave a case of them to an amateur radio club in my hometown in Georgia, and they certainly received them and gave them to new hams they licensed. So there's some real antipathy with some of the Balfangs. And I know the ARL with Bob Allison, before he retired a few years ago at the Hamvention, had a spectrum analyzer, and you could bring an HT there, and he would run some tests on it and print out a graph and show it to you to look for spurs. So, it's like a lot of other stuff from the Asian Pacific Rim. Some of it's great, most of it's cheap, and a lot of it works.
Yeah, it certainly is, Frank. And as I say, it was just interesting that I don't know how many they actually tested. You get good and bad things in any batch of devices, be it electronic or otherwise. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, and I remember actually, Frank, I'm about to say the same thing. I remember at the convention, they had a stand there where you could go and bring along your handheld, and they would test it and show for any harmonics that shouldn't have been there, etc. Which is interesting. I didn't get my radio tested, but I thought that the Baofengs, and certainly the EV5R, I've actually just done an internet search to check this, had FCC and CE approval. In fact, I've just done a little image search there, and on the back of the EV5R, certainly the one on this particular image that's on the internet, has a CE logo on the back of the radio and an FCC logo as well, which kind of indicates that it's been tested and approved. So my assumption is, and I'm not read into this, that the issue is around harmonics and spurious emissions, but don't know for certain. I do know, like you were saying, Martin, politically, a lot of Chinese equipment isn't necessarily popular in certain parts of the world. But I guess they built to a certain price. I mean, I've not seen the results. I've not seen the reasoning or the report saying why that they've particularly been banned in that part of the world. But certainly, that they seem to have had certification for different parts of the world. So, and they seem to, I assume that they conform with the rules. So unless they found, like you were saying, some that perhaps aren't complying with the rules, done a sample or something and tested, and someone found that actually there's some missing filtering or something or the like, then I don't see what the issue is really.
Chris, you kind of touched on a point here that I've not thought about before. I don't know to what extent different FCC equivalent groups that test these things and approve them, I don't know to what extent they have different standards. So, the one in Germany may have different standards than the UK, or is it Ofcom in the UK that would do the same testing?
So I thought that CE was a European standard thing. So
Okay.
Although quite with Brexit now, I don't know if that's still the case, but certainly it was certainly a European certification.
Well, it'll be interesting for me to check in and see, if the CE standards for things like harmonics and things is the same as what the FCC requires. That's a great point.
Yeah, like I say, so it might just be, I don't know if they do spot checks or, we'll see, they take it, I guess they submit models to a laboratory, I suppose, to get the original certification done. Whether the regulator then does and does spot checks on things that they bought, I don't know. But there must have been an issue here.
Yeah, I don't think you can just say, for argument's sake, it's one manufacturer, for argument's sake, Baofeng. When I come on to what I've been up to at the end, I've actually got a new Baofeng DMR one. However, it's pretty obvious that either Baofeng make Radio Oddity or Radio Oddity make Baofeng radio, because it's the same radio.
The other thing I was going to say was I think a lot of these cheap radios are typically a system on a chip. There's literally one IC in the main component of the radio is certainly the EV3R, and I'm assuming it's the same with the EV5R. The reason these are very cheap radios, and the reason they all look very similar and have a very similar way of operating, is because they've got the same chip inside. So actually, that's doing the majority of the work, is that one single chip on a board. And there's a few other components that are required, but the vast majority of the work is done by that one component. So I'd imagine that the other manufacturers are either they're all coming from the same factory and are sticking their sticker on, or they're using the same components, and that's why they seem very similar.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on this one.
But moving on to the second part of the story around vacuum cleaners. So this one seems to have, again, been in Germany, although I think it's come originally from the Polish authorities. They've done some work around a particular model of robotic vacuum cleaner, which again is the wireless part of that is not complying. And apparently this story says it was being sold without a CE mark and therefore not necessarily complying with the rules.
Yeah, it also mentioned something about a laser, and I was thinking it might be one of these laser pointers, as it was range finding itself, with driving cats and dogs wild. And I've done it, and I know you have, Chris. Cats love chasing a red dot. So you can sit in your armchair and squirt a red dot down and watch the cats go ballistic chasing it. But I know Mr. Rothwell's a cat lover, so he's probably going to ban me from visiting him ever again after that.
No, my cats love the laser, and we don't do it all the time because they do get a bit frustrated when there's actually nothing for them to catch. But I think as long as if you're going to do that, then you've got to let them chuck a toy mouse in or something like that, and they're fine. But yeah, we've played with the laser occasionally, and they seem to love it.
Yeah, good fun. It's good fun. Right, let's move to our next news story. Senator Blumenthal supports amateur radio at the Senate confirmation hearing. Frank, this is one for the States. Would you like to go first on this one?
Sure. This is a positive thing. The Federal Communications Commission is up for a new chairperson. It's a woman, Jessica Rosenworcel. And it's very common for the Senate in these confirmation hearings to ask all kind of questions. And Senator Blumenthal is from Connecticut. He is sort of the ARL's homeboy, to use some slang. He's the local senator who has been receiving constituent requests from the ARL for a number of years. And that's basically what this was. He simply asked if she would commit to provide his office in the Senate update on the steps that the FCC is taking to support amateur radio operators. And, this is somewhat of a PR thing, but on the other hand, it's good to put that out there. Others will see amateur radio is important to at least this senator, if not others. And I suspect Ms. Rosenworcel already knew about amateur radio and certainly has an understanding of its importance, in the radio spectrum. So this is not much ado about nothing, but it's not, a lightning bolt from the sky that, oh, geez, amateur radio is the best thing since sliced bread. It's just a fairly common thing that will occur on a range of issues. I suspect if we looked at the video of the hearing, that other senators on that committee would have asked about broadband, white space that used to have TV signals, and what's her stance on that as well. It's just good that the senator from Connecticut, where the ARL is located, was willing to ask this question and put it on the record.
Certainly is, Frank. Certainly is. And I think when we were originally talking about this, I get the impression that your government understands more about amateur radio than, say, the UK government. And I don't know, Chris. Do you know of any government official or anybody in the House of Parliament that's a radio amateur? Because I certainly don't.
No, I don't. No, they're very quiet if they are. We get told there's a few celebrities that have a license. I've never heard any of them on the air. But no, I've not politically. No, I don't think it is particularly supported by any politicians in this country, or promoted, shall we say? Which is a bit of a shame. I know in the States, and obviously this is where they've kind of mentioned this in the Senate, was around was it the Senate, around the contributions that people make around supporting public services, etc., and helping out in disasters, etc. Maybe in this country perhaps we don't do as much of that. We don't necessarily have the need. We don't have the same weather systems over here. We don't quite have the same extremes of weather, like hurricanes and that sort of thing, maybe in this country, or earthquakes or those sorts of disasters quite as much perhaps as in the States. And obviously we're a much smaller country, so perhaps we don't have that exposure that perhaps in the States, perhaps radio amateurs are perhaps seen in a better light, because they do provide much more support in that regard.
Yeah, as I say, but the States does have far more extreme weather situations than we have over here, so it's probably more on people's minds. Although, we have an amateur radio emergency group over in the UK as well. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I was thinking about it. Would our MPs support us on amateur radio? I've got to be honest, mate. They can barely support each other. They're too busy playing to political games, and apparently, and allegedly, I say this allegedly, attending parties. I did write to my MP on a couple of things a while back. One of them, in fact, related to amateur radio. I forget what, but it did relate to amateur radio. But turns out he only replies if he actually agrees with you. If he doesn't agree with you, he doesn't bother. So needless to say, that did cost him my vote. But yeah, I don't think there's anybody in Parliament that is licensed. I think we would, as amateurs, we would probably know that. The RSGB may know, but yeah, I don't know. I very much doubt if we needed the support of government for anything, I doubt they would do anything. I think they would just refer it to Ofcom, and depending on who you get through to at Ofcom, depends on the result that you would get. Because at the same time, I'm not totally sure that there's lots of people in Ofcom that are licensed. So I don't know.
Well, I would hope that if there ever was a situation, hopefully there won't be, where amateur radio has to step in and provide if there was some sort of disaster and amateur radio was seen as beneficial, we did something to help in a serious way, then actually we hopefully would get that recognition, and that might obviously hopefully it won't happen, but we might get that recognition from the politicians at that time, and perhaps they will take us seriously.
Yeah, quite possibly could happen, but let's just hope we're never needed in that for
Absolutely.
Those reasons. Yeah,
absolutely, I totally agree.
Yeah, I agree with you. Hopefully we're never needed in an emergency situation. And nice work. Nice bit of PR for amateur radio in the States, I think. So I'm quite pleased. It's a nice story. It's a nice bit. Gets us in the media, which is good. Right. Last news story. 60th anniversary of the first launch of a ham radio satellite. 60 years ago. God, 1961. I mean, this is almost frightening, Chris. What do you think?
Well, it is. I mean, this is before I was born, but it doesn't feel as though I was born in the 1970s. It doesn't feel like the 1960s was 60 years ago, but it is. 1961 is 60 years ago. I was said before we started to record, when I was over in the States, I went to the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. In fact, it's actually in Virginia, but they call it the Washington, D.C. It's next to the Dulles Airport. And they've got a model there of Oscar 1, and I remember saying it. Oh, look, there's Oscar 1 there, and it's a scale model, but Oscar 1 isn't particularly massive. It's quite interesting to see, but it's interesting to see it was there, and that it was, well, frankly, from that long ago. I've done a little bit of googling of the technology that was in use, and it was it looks like it was pretty basic, but fascinating. We managed to get something up into space back then, and it worked. It was a 10-kilogram payload, so it was reasonably sized. It wasn't reasonable size, isn't it? But yeah, it worked on the 2-meter band, and it was a 140 milliwatt transmitter, and it sent a little bit of Morse code that people could pick up. So that was pretty cool. I don't think it lasted. I don't think it was in operation particularly long, but no, very good, very cool. But it was up there in space, and then it was able to work all what time ago.
The frightening thing is, Chris, I was actually 8 when it was sent up, and I wouldn't have even been aware of it, but there was lots of things about satellites. I mean, the big one from that time of the year, that time of my life, was people talking about Telstar, which was a television transmitter for, well, it wasn't like Sky. It was used by people like the telecoms companies for beaming television signals between countries. But 60 years, oh dear, that worries me. Martin, you weren't born, were you?
No, I'm not as ancient as that. No, I'm kidding. No, I wasn't. How old am I now? 40. I'm 41 now. I have to think I passed 40 and I stopped counting. But
that's good practice.
Yeah, I mean it's a phenomenal thing that this was in space 60 years ago, and for amateurs as well. I mean, you only have to look back to when I was a kid in the 1980s, how primitive a lot of the technology was, like computers and things like that then. And if you look at radios and things that you can still buy on the online auction sites and things, you think, yeah, they are, the technology there is a lot more primitive. There's stuff running on valves and things like that. What's running on this kit in space? I haven't looked at the kit that's inside it, but I dread to think what it would cost. So it was definitely a feat to get it up in space at that point. Let's face it, nowadays it's a lot. It's not easy, but it's relatively easy by comparison to get things in space. I do wonder if this thing is still up there. Is it still on the air? It's. I think I saw on the Wikipedia article it had a mission of about 3 days or something like that. And obviously, you take what you can on Wikipedia with a pinch of salt. But there's a lot of satellites they say suddenly reappear that they thought they'd lost when they suddenly, they fall back into light of the sun or something like that and start charging their batteries up again. But I do wonder whether this will ever just resurface. But it's on 144.92 or something like that. So
144,983 megahertz. Yeah. And it was apparently it lasted 22 days.
Was it 22?
Yeah.
Did it burn up in the atmosphere, or is it still up there?
I don't know.
Yeah, this is a great piece of work, and for 1961, I'm guessing it was probably valve technology, boys. I'm guessing.
I do think so.
Yeah.
So
it re-entered on January 31st, 1962.
All right.
There you go. Interestingly, the Wikipedia article also goes on to say that they actually had a backup for Oscar 1. I assume they built 2 in case one of them didn't work. And this would be I'm guessing this is the one that didn't go into space. That was fully restored and is operational and runs today at Newington at the AWL headquarters, and today does still send out that HI in Morse code on the 2-meter band. So that's pretty cool.
I think so. Frank, what's your thoughts?
Let me focus on one little element, and I want to stitch this story and the previous one together. The previous one we talked about how Senator Blumenthal, asked a public question about the importance of amateur radio, and would she be the would-be, and since then confirmed, FCC commissioner or chair, talk about how the FCC is going to support amateur radio, which was a clear message that if you don't, I'll be back. In this story, I'll quote someone from the articles, just getting a ride for the Oscar one was all political. Just huge conversations that were beyond me at the time when I was 21 years old. It took some heavyweight people to make the Air Force flying a classified reconnaissance mission allow ham operators to attach a civilian-made satellite. It took Republican Senator Barry Goldwater, an amateur radio operator, and General Curtis LeMay, Chief of the Air Force. I want to think LeMay was also a licensed ham, but my memory may fail me. So these kinds of connections in the political world can bear tremendous fruit for amateur radio, at least here in the States. And I give my hat off to the ARL for tending that store. They don't always get it right, like with the Parity Act and how it sort of failed, but they get a lot of it right. And by maintaining that presence, such as Senator Blumenthal did and Barry Goldwater did back in the day, you get access where otherwise you just wouldn't have the proverbial snowball's chance. So it's a great story. Martin, my back hurts just thinking about this being 60 years ago. It came on the heels of Sputnik, which was the Russian flash in the pan that put them in the lead of a space race. And it was all the ammunition that President Kennedy at the time needed to push the U.S. into spaceflight. So some of the social and historical elements of this are as strong as the technology.
Certainly is. And it is, when you think back 60 years, it's great that we've been as amateurs, been in space for 60 years. And I'd suggest 95% of the public will have no idea, probably even higher than that, no idea that we've even got satellites up there today, what we're using. But great bit of news, 60 years, certainly something worth celebrating. And it launched on the 12th of December, 1961. So,
Interestingly, Morse, I just found a video on YouTube from dated in 2011 where they had that backup Oscar 1 satellite, the one they restored, working, and you can see it working. And fascinating, the most fascinating thing on this, well, one of the most fascinating thing I find here is that it cost to build $68. And I know that was more money than it is today, but that still sounds incredibly cheap for something that's gone into space.
Yeah. Well, I suppose in many ways, and I'm going to be talking maybe out mouth open, brain in neutral, but if it's never been done before, you don't know what you've got to do to make it work. And sometimes ignorance pulls you through a project where everybody who might know how to do things going, oh, you can't do that because the common wisdom says you mustn't do that. And I've mentioned it before in the podcast. If we'd have known how to put a repeater on the air before we got GB3XP on the air, Martin, we'd have never have done it.
Nope.
Because we wouldn't, once we found out what all the problems were, we only found them out as we were doing it. If we'd have been told all the problems at day one, we'd have probably looked at it, no, ain't worth doing. So, yeah, good on them. They did a good job there, I think. Right, let's find out what you've been up to. Frank, what have you been playing with since our last chat?
Well, you'll get a charge out of this, hi. You did a feature on building battery boxes a few episodes ago, Martin, and there's an old saying that no good deed goes unpunished. Well, there's a corollary that there's nothing like getting something free to make you spend more money. A couple of years ago, Ham, in a local club that I was a member of at the time, worked for a medical maintenance company, and he got recycled batteries that were taken out of medical equipment. So I built some battery boxes using the 28 amp hour and associated 12 volt batteries, seal lead acid. And as Martin Rothwell can tell you, it's not a good thing as we get older to lift heavy things. So I had built some battery boxes, and the lithium iron phosphate, the LiFePO batteries, have just kind of taken at least amateur radio by storm. They're so much lighter, and yet you can discharge them far beyond the 50% range that you should only discharge seal lead acid batteries too. So been building more battery boxes. I've replaced a 36 amp hour battery box with seal lead acid with 3 similar LiFePO batteries. So I've got one for 36 amp hours, another new one for 96 amp hours, using 4 24 amp hour LiFePO batteries. And I'm about to take delivery on 2 100 amp hour LiFePO batteries. It will give me a box that will be in a little rolling tool chest resin thing, be light, for 200 amp hours. And it will have a little Bluetooth ability to monitor the discharge. These will mostly be for portable ops team activities. The 200 amp hour one seems like overkill, but I have a 500 watt mobile amp, and that'll power that amplifier. So I've been doing some of that, and I told you you'd get a charge out of it, Martin. So I had unfortunately let my AMSAT, American Satellite Group, membership lapse. I missed an email a couple of months ago. And so when I went to re-up, they've got a program where over 12 months, they'll bill you the same amount for 12 months and you become a life member. So I decided to become a life member of AMSAT. Last Christmas, Santa Claus delivered an ICOM IC 9700, and I plan to get more into satellites. Very apropos for this episode with the stories we've covered. So I figured a little investment, become a life member in AMSAT would be a good way to help me learn more and use my equipment. In our rehearsal, I told Chris I was doing some really exciting things in amateur radio, like winding all of my USB, Ethernet, and power cables in my shack with USB cores. That's a really exciting way to practice amateur radio, but it does cut down on noise. I've been buying my cores from a guy named Chris Perry out in Utah at kf7p.com. And for about 10 years now, ground copper systems and ferrites, and he has a real good price. I've been very happy with how he packs them. Never had one show up cracked, and that's a real problem today when you order ferrite cores, is they get tossed from here, there, and yonder, and he's just got a way of packing them, so at least I've never had one to crack. On my workbench, I've just not been pleased in the past with solder smoke extractor fans. I've had one from Hako. I built one from some PC server fans, and it worked well, but geez, I don't know what the decibels of sound were. It's like a helicopter was taking off, and I'm finally tired of that. And I found something on eBay that I am really, really, really happy with. It's a Wathai, Wathai is the brand name, and they've got ball bearing in 3 120 millimeter square fans. And so there's an AC power supply with it, but they run on 12 volts, but there's a variable speed on it. And I fastened carbon fiber stuff on the back to catch the bad stuff and turn them backwards. And it fits across the back of my soldering platform. Could not be more pleased. I'd encourage listeners, if they're in the market for that, to look on eBay and just take a look. It may not fit in your situation, but I am just tickled for that. Finishing a couple of things, such as the bandpass filter board I bought from VK Amps in Australia. And I've been struggling like a lot of hams do, and I'm open for suggestions here from other presenters, to get a good system to label homebrew project boxes. I've been using clear tape from some of the Brother equipment line to labels, and they look like what they are, kind of amateurish. I'm about to try some laser print-based adhesive clear sheets where you design a full cover for the front and the back of the box, taking meticulous measurements and so forth, and print them out on a color laser printer. and then adhere them to it. I'm going to try that, but I'm sort of looking for suggestions. I'm sorry Bill Barnes is not here. He's always telling us about people he's worked, and these are not big DX exploits on my end. But I did work a guy on 40 meters in Belize, Bill V31XX, using 10 watts of sideband in an Icq dipole, my Cushcraft D4. All that was on my IC 705. And also a guy in Soyset, New York, on 20 meters using 5 watts sideband with the same Icq dipole. The guy, John KF2GV, really had a hard time believing that I was using the equipment that I was. So my 705 is getting a little bit of a workout, and my new antennas in the Icq that I've been testing with Whisper, they seem to be able to get out at least partly. Just before we went to record today, 10 meters in the States has been open, and I spent about 10 minutes trying to make some contacts, but the bigger, more powerful stations kind of eased me out. Martin, I'll end with this since you brought it up during our VoIP emergency story over in the United Kingdom. I have a current Cisco VoIP phone. I paid a grand total of $25 US for, but I just purchased another one, and this is a Cisco SPA 500S, and it has a sidecar attachment that I also bought. It's an attendant console, and what that allows you to do is program various buttons to get on Ham Shack hotline. But I will be able to have one phone in my Ham Shack and one phone out in my workbench area, which is off the garage, which is on the other end of the house here where I live. The really exciting part about Ham Shack Hotline are the bridges and rooms, conference rooms, for various topics that are being allowed on this free VoIP service. Some link repeater systems are bridging their rooms, bridging their systems into a room. And as I understand it, that can be configured to allow transmission into those repeater systems as well as monitoring it. I don't know where this will go, but we kind of spend money on things that may not go anywhere, but if they do, it'll prove to be a good investment. So I'm tinkering with that, and if the other presenters get into this, Martin, like you have, maybe we'll have our own room for the digital talk group. What do you say?
It's interesting, Frank. Interesting. I did do a very, very high level reach out to Ham Shack Hotline and say, "Hey, what do you have to do to be able to effectively have your own room or stream the talk group through it?" Unfortunately, from what I could work out and what they were telling me, it's got to be, you literally have to be in analog mode, and you have to come in via PABX. And we didn't want to do add analog to our digital system. So
QSL, understand that fully, Martin.
No. That's a good call, Frank, because I actually looked.
Yeah, but also understand, the decision to keep it digital and understand that. So that's, I hear you.
The other one, very quickly, in answer to your question of, when I build things, I often make the front panel, do it up in one of the drawing programs, draw the front panel out as I want, print it out on a laser jet, offer it up to the board, and if it looks good, I then print it out on coloured either paper or card, and then I laminate it, and I make the label just a little bit shorter, smaller than the box size, because the laminator goes up to the edge, and I laminate it on. And sometimes you can hold the knobs and switches hold the thing on for you. Other times you have to glue it on. And if you've got a LCD display, what I've often done is cut the card or paper, the hole out where the display is, and then when you put it up, the laminate is clear anyway, and you can see through the laminate onto the display. But I'm by no means an expert at this, Frank. So just a thought.
Well, that's a great suggestion. I've seen other people who have talked about doing that, and I'm going to try. I just got this in 10 sheets of this laser printer compatible adhesive clear sheet. So I'll try that, and if that just doesn't work, I may try your method. Thanks for the advice.
Yeah, it's just a thought, Frank. It may be of use, it may be not for anybody. Okay, Martin, what have you been up to?
Clearly not as much as Frank. As you mentioned earlier on, I've spent a fair amount of time on the podcast talk group 9480 on the various modes, just depending on which radio is charged and which one takes my fancy for the day. I bought a new hotspot, actually. Bought one of the ones similar to the ones that I think you and Chris are using. For some time, I've been using a much higher powered hotspot that allows me to drive around my local area and connect at home, which I still have and I still use, and it works very well. But this little hotspot's just a UHF one based on a Raspberry Pi Zero, I think. The guy that was selling them, pre-made, comes with software, even configures it for you. And he also includes things like an Ethernet adapter so you can plug it into your network and you don't have to use Wi-Fi. Really, really useful instructions by comparison to some of the ones that are on the well-known retailers' sites. I'm actually quite delighted with it. It's something that's, when I do go back into work, that will come to work with me. It's something that will almost certainly, if we go like on camping holidays and things like that, will come with me as well, because I always take a 4G hotspot, so why not take that as well? So I brought that, and typically just playing with that here in the home office during the day, and it's using less electric than my other hotspot, which is all good. And the other thing that I've been doing is I've been trying to program a high terror radio. Had it sitting here for a while to work with my Pi-Star hotspot, but having issues with that because whereas it can hear my other radio talking, if you key up my Anytone radio, the high terror goes, and then you can hear the content. But whatever's coming out the hotspot, it doesn't seem to like on the same frequency, ironically. So there's obviously something going on there, but we'll get to the bottom of that eventually. But I spent quite a long time scratching my head, like, why is this not working? But we will get to the bottom of that. But as I say, it's not massively urgent at the moment because I've got various other ways of getting onto the talk group, which is all good. And I think I mentioned in the last podcast, maybe that DroidStar is now working again on my phone. I followed the instructions, downloaded the earlier version, installed it. So on a couple of times I have had to pop into the office. I've been using the hotspot via DroidStar, which also seems to, not the hotspot, the talk group through DroidStar, which seems to work quite well as well. So all good.
So all in all, quite good. And I did say I'd come and have a look at your high terror for you at some point in time when you're available, because I'm not at work at the moment, and I know you are, so we have to be sensible about it.
Maybe tomorrow. I'll give you a shout off air.
All right, then. No problem. So there you go. Chris, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Not a huge amount. We had a club talk last week. Great talk on amateur TV by a chap called Dave Crump, who is the chairman of the British Amateur TV Club. That was really good. I don't know much about amateur TV.
Very good.
So he did a great time. Frank, you were there. Yeah, it was a good talk. So
enjoyed it.
That was
immensely.
good. And it makes us realise just how wide our hobby is. Even though I've been doing this for a few years now, there's lots of things I still don't know about, and that was a good one. So that was good. On the radio side, on a little bit on HF, but not a massive amount. And again, likewise on the digital talk group as well. I've been on Fusion and DMR or on the talk group, although there's not been a massive amount of activity when I've particularly been on. But maybe over Christmas, I know that we're doing one of the round tables, whatever it's called, in the new year, aren't we, I think, or just at the end of the year, aren't we, I think, to get some listeners involved. That would be good. And I'm sure you'll be talking about that later, Martin. Other things, I've been playing with the Raspberry Pi. So as you probably know, this year I bought a camper van, and it's now coming into winter, and I want to keep an eye on the temperature in there because I don't want it to freeze, and you have to drain things down in winter. You need to make sure your water tanks are empty and things are kind of winterized. But I want to kind of still, I've got a heater in there which I want to switch on when it starts to get cold. So I've started working on a little project to try and use a Raspberry Pi with a temperature monitor in there. So you can buy a thing called a DS18B20, which is a little chip that you can connect into the GPIO. Very simple circuit, and then you can read the temperature quite easily. So I want to try and base something on that little project to try to monitor and perhaps give me an alert when the temperature goes below a certain value. Which I think is quite cool from both an IT and a kind of an electronics perspective. Try some sort of cloud type solution or something. So that'll be good to learn some new stuff. And I also bought a new bit of kit. I bought a soldering iron from a well-known German supermarket chain here in the UK. It's actually a cordless soldering iron. They use a sort of a cordless drill battery. They've got a range of products that use these battery packs that use things like drills and saws and all kinds of things that use the cordless battery packs. And they have I thought I'd buy it. So it was like, I think it was about £9. It's pretty cheap. So I bought this cordless soldering iron, which I thought that'd be useful. I've already got a gas-based one, but I thought, well, this might last a bit longer. This might last a bit longer than the gas. And yeah, it's pretty good. It works pretty well. Comes with a little reel of solder, and you get a couple of different sized tips. Although I wouldn't suggest this is probably very good for service mount type work. They're a little bit chunky. And it does get pretty hot as well. You can't change the temperature. It just seems to get a bit hot when it heats up. But I guess it could be useful for things like perhaps working on the car, or if you're working outside, where you can't just plug in a soldering iron. This might be useful for the quick. So I thought that was pretty good. So yeah, that's what I've been up to, Martin.
Yeah, sounds interesting. I've seen your little soldering iron, and yeah, it probably gets hotter than you expect, because nowadays we're all supposed to be, and I use the word supposed to be, using lead-free solder that melts at a much higher temperature. So that could be a reason.
And I was also wondering if it's used outside. I know any tiny breeze can very rapidly cool the iron down. So perhaps it's just to counteract that a little bit as well.
Yeah, certainly. Outside use is a nightmare. You know, if you're right, any little breeze will drain the heat away fairly quickly. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I took delivery of a Belfang DM 1801, and this is a DMR radio, and I kind of wanted it for doing a few experiments with, and as along with my my Anytone. And I thought, well, if Colin comes over from Ireland, Chris, Martin and I are often on DMR, I can just put this in his hand and say, there you go, you can join us on DMR. So decided to use the software that came with the radio, and everybody told me it was a nightmare and it was horrible. Well, they were dead right. And I spent about 2 hours, and I looked at it and thought, you know what? I'm not going to fight this any longer. I could have worked out to get it to work properly and one thing or another, but I was told that the Open GD77 software, which Ed done a feature on, was really good, and it worked. So I went looking for it, and unfortunately, it has a lot of the websites have been taken down. And I thought, oh no, don't do that to me. Eventually found it, the software, installed the current version, the stable version, and it looked very good, and the radio suddenly had a lot more functions, and I was quite pleased. Then I started reading the manual, and half the functions I had in the manual were in my radio. So I found another version of the stable release and installed that, and a few more functions showed up, but I still didn't know everything. Anyway, I was so pleased with the way the software seemed to work. I took a flyer and I installed the current beta version for December 2021, and it's working great. It's got some phenomenal ideas. You can do satellite work with it. You can do DMR. You can scan 800 kilohertz of frequency to see where people are. Loads and loads and loads of useful functions. Things like the timeout timer. When you set it, it displays on your radio, so you can see when you're getting close to your timeout. So lots of nice things. Also bought a couple of Raspberry Pis, like we were talking about. I think Raspberry Pis are the thing that we're all looking at the moment, on and off. And I bought a 5-inch touchscreen for mine, and I was originally going to run ham clock on it. So then when I costed up how much the Raspberry Pi cost and how much the screen cost, and I thought, this is about £110 worth of hardware to run a free clock. Now, don't get me wrong, ham clock is a nice piece of software. It does work very well, and I'll talk about that in a minute, because there is some other things on that. But I then decided to look at it and say, well, can I use this screen with my hotspot? And initially, all the things on the internet show a Nexian screen and how to connect a Nexian screen up. I didn't have one of those. So Andy's written this script that displays on a monitor what you would get if you log into the device as a web page, which is quite useful, because what I've done is I've put my internal 5-inch display on and it shows the web page. So I've got a little 5-inch screen, shows me who's connected, what they're doing, and all that sort of thing. So that works very, very well at the moment. And Andy's script, it's quite a big script. It loads, you have to load all the graphic interface, the GUI, on top of the Raspberry Pi image, and eventually you get the output to one of your monitor sockets that is exactly the same as it is if you log in via the web to your hotspot. A bit of bad news. A couple of days ago, we got hacked, or we got an attack on our bridge server. Yeah, they brought our bridge server down for a little while. It's one of these company groups that fire loads of traffic at your box until it falls over. We've put a few changes in place, which has made the box a little bit slow at the moment, but we're working on that to improve it. But we've actually seen 4 in the last 24 hours, 4 major sites that have tried to hack our system. They're blocked now, so that's the end of them. All right. One other thing. The ICQ podcast being found on Brandmeister. Well, you guys know that we have the ICQ Brandmeister talk group 9480. But I've actually had 2 new people, never heard of the ICQ podcast, spotted traffic on the Brandmeister dashboard going through with UK call signs, and programmed up the radios, came out and give us a call and have found out about the podcast. So if you catch somebody on that isn't a podcast listener, be nice to them. We welcome all amateurs. You never know, they might be a podcast listener later, but that's been quite useful. And very quickly, Ham Clock is a piece of software, runs on a Raspberry Pi or a Linux box. There is a new version just come out this week, and Phil was telling me about it, so I've got to do that. But interestingly enough, and this rammed it home to me quite hard, I run google.co.uk in my search engine. And if I put Ham Clock in it, the Ham Clock Live main website telling you how to install it and where the software is and all this is on the screen. It's the number 1 item. If you run DuckDuckGo, it doesn't appear in any of them. It just doesn't appear. So it actually kicked home to me quite hard that depending on what internet browser you are running, depends on what you may or may not see in your browser. And it will also change wherever you live in the country, which country you live in. And the last thing on my list, we've got the Digital Hub, the ICQ Digital Hub meeting happening on Wednesday at midnight, 00 UTC, or on the 29th to the 12th of 21. So midnight, it starts midnight on the Wednesday the 29th, rolls into Thursday, hoping that by picking that time, it's rotten for us in Europe, but we should get some people on from better for the States, and it should be better for the Southern Hemisphere. So look forward to chatting to people who would like to join us on that one. So that's what I've been up to, guys. Bit long-winded, but there you go.
All good, Martin.
Yeah, well, I've been busy. Right, so all that's left for me to do now is to thank you guys for turning up. And so I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, guys. Another fun episode.
Yeah, good one. I'd also like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
Been fun. See you next time.
Yeah, and you didn't get me into too much trouble, did you?
It's not the end of the episode yet.
That's true. See what I have to put up with, Frank, Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
Thank you, Martin. And look, Martin Rothwell brings up a good point. It ain't over till it's over.
That's true. That's true. Right, boys. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'll say 73 is to you, and we'll continue with the podcast. 73, guys.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time for the news in brief with me, Colin, M6BOY. Start off with news here of unfortunate news. The RSGB has made the decision to close the National Radio Centre, which is located in Bletchley Park near Milton Keynes. This is due to the changing situation in the UK with the COVID cases and numbers. So the RSGB made the decision to close the National Radio Centre on the Friday the 17th of December, and will keep closed for the Christmas and New Year period to be reviewed in the new year. So I say we obviously wish everyone safety through this period of time and this season, and I say look forward to news when the National Radio Centre will come back online. News for RSGB members: any vouchers for free entry, etc. Currently that system will be offline for applications and will obviously be brought back online in due course when the centre's back up and running again. So it looks like any planned visits to the National Radio Centre will have to take place from January onwards. Now, time to get the diary out because hopefully we're going to get some stuff on next year. On June 25th of June 2022, the first GI-QRP convention will be taking place in Northern Ireland. Presentations start at 10 a.m. There'll be lectures and seminars, a build-a-thon, special interest groups, talk-ins, trade stands, prize draw, raffles, catering, licensed bar, ample parking and disabled access, and more importantly, a chance to get together with your fellow amateur radio enthusiasts. This will be the first ever QRP convention in Northern Ireland in the GI region of the UK call signs, and I say it will also be an opportunity to work the GQRP club call sign GI5 Lima Oscar Whiskey for the first time on the week leading up to the convention and the weekend of the convention itself. So great news that we've got this convention coming online, and as I say, put that one in your diary for the 25th of June 2022. Talking about things for the diary as well, the members of the Association of Radio Amateurs from Monaco are marking the 100th anniversary of the death of Albert I, Prince of Monaco, who lived between 1848 and 1922, between the 1st of April and the end of May next year, using the special event call sign 3 Alpha 5 Mike. The Prince was a humanist, scientist and founder of the Oceanic Museum and Institute in Monaco. So certainly a very well-regarded gentleman, and as I say, an opportunity to get that call sign in your book. QSO will be via the Bureau for that event, and as I say, it takes place between the 1st of April and the 31st of May. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode as we look forward to seasonal radio fun. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the Icq podcast. Hi guys, for this episode's feature I want you to talk about a few things that we can be doing over the holiday break. With Christmas break now less than a week away, I'm guessing some of us are going to have a fair amount of time on our hands. If you're like me, you won't want to watch the old Christmas movie for the 20th time. There are a few suggestions I'm going to make that hopefully will keep our sanity. Now, I'm going to suggest the first one, and it's a group suggestion. Why not put out a few calls on your local repeater, your 2m77's repeater? There will be a number of hams that are on their own this year for Christmas, or people in lockdown that would really take a lot of pleasure in a contact. So, we are a sociable hobby, and a quick chat to a few other hams in the area may be very rewarding for both parties. But I find it certainly rewarding chatting to people, and I'm sure if somebody's on their own, they're really going to enjoy talking to you. So that's my first suggestion. Talk to people locally. I know that you want to work at the other side of the world, but don't forget our locals. Moving on. Usually over the Christmas period there are a number of contests, and if you're a contester, you'll probably know about them. If you're not a hardened contester, then two of my favourites used to happen, and I'm not sure if they're happening this year. The GI-QRP Club used to put on activity days for about, a few hours anyway, over the Christmas period. So you may want to look out and see if there's any HF activity, just after lunch in the UK to see if anything's happening on there. My favourite contest of all time was when I was in Ireland a few years ago, and this was New Year's Day, the Irish 80-metre New Year's Day contest. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but be aware, the rules from what I remember were you got 4 points for working a station in Ireland, and you got 1 point for anywhere else in the world. So they will prefer to work an Irish station. But, hey, you can still have a bit of fun with it. And it's not a hurried contest, or I didn't find it anyway. So, contesting, if you're into it, great. If you're not, just fancy doing a bit of operating, then this might be a good time to just have a little play at contesting. Now, if you want to find out what's happening in the contest world, there is a website called the Contest Calendar, and you can find that on www.contestcalendar.com, index.html obviously, but it should go straight to it. So that will tell you all the contests that are happening in the near future for you. Lots of ways you can search on them, and it could be a bit of fun. Moving on, I know a number of you have heard myself and Phil, VK6ADF, talk about Ham Clock. It's an interesting piece of software, really, really worth a look. So, if you've got a spare Raspberry Pi kicking around, or you've got a Linux box, have a look at Ham Clock. I tell you what, once you set it up, it does have a wow factor, and people coming to your house or walking in and see a clock like that and go, yeah, that's interesting, what's that all about? And that's what we're kind of interested in. Now, the website I'm going to give you, because I did say in the podcast that you can connect with different browsers and different search engines and get different results, but the one you want is from www.clearskyinstitute.com. That's www.clearskyinstitute.com/ham/ham clock. That's the one you want. There's all the instructions on how to install it, how to download it, how it works. A really good manual, great fun, and I would say that even if you're being a bit naughty and you have your Raspberry Pi connected to your big 42 or 50-inch plasma screen in the front room, or LCD TV in the front room, when somebody comes in the room, they're going to ask you, what is that? So, worth a look, I would suggest. Moving on, satellite tracking. Well, this could be interesting for some of the family. I would suggest looking at an application called gPredict. It runs under Windows, Mac and Linux, and it just predicts when satellites are coming over and the path, and gives you an indication of how high above the horizon they are. Now, I think it's great fun, and lots of the public enjoy going outside. If you tell them the International Space Station is going over, and it's on a visible pass, then somebody can go outside with you and look up and actually see the International Space Station go over. And I bet they haven't done that before. And it's quite interesting. The first time you do it, it's great. Usually people want to do it more than once. So that's quite an interesting one just to track, let's say, the International Space Station. And you could set your radio up to listen, just in case they're broadcasting. I believe that odd times they will be producing slow scan TV over the Christmas period, so watch out for that as well. So satellite watching is great fun. Moving on, a number of us have got children or grandchildren. In my case, grandchildren, because my young adults now, or middle-aged adults, I should say. Hi. No, children love playing, and if they've got something to do that keeps their interest, that's great. And as a granddad, I've often sat down with mine and shown them all sorts of bits and pieces just for the sheer fun of it, and built things and played with all sorts. Now, children love Morse. There's no two ways about it. Most children love Morse, because if you say to them, do you like making a noise? They go, yeah. And then the second part of it is they think that if they learn Morse, their parents won't learn Morse, and they've got some secret sort of code that they can communicate in. So, children absolutely love Morse. So, get a Morse buzzer out. Get them to send their name. And just spend some time with them and have a bit of fun. Moving to a slightly higher level, if they're really getting into this, there's an interesting application written by Charlie, M0PZT, and Charlie wrote an application called Morse Mouse, and you can find that on the internet at www.m0pzt.com/Morse-mouse. And basically, it's just a simple game. And Charlie's written this game where the mouse has to get from the left-hand side of the screen to the right-hand side of the screen by you getting the letters right that you hear transmitted. So that it sends say an A, and you push A on the keyboard, the mouse moves forward. If you get it wrong 3 times, the mouse gets clobbered. So interesting. And don't worry, guys, you haven't even got to find a Morse sheet to give to the children to play this one, because Charlie, in part of the application, when you install it, you get the document that gives them all the letters and the codes for it. So nice little bit of fun. Now, for those that are a little bit older or not quite so interested, I often show youngsters their voice. Now, they've heard their voice. Everybody's heard their voice sometimes. But it's nice sometimes to just say, have you seen your voice? And they go, no. And you get a microphone, connect it to an oscilloscope, and away you go. And they often like looking at that. And they get things from it. You say, the louder you are, the taller the display is, and all those sort of things. And they quite like that. Now, another thing is, for if you're having a bit of fun and you're sitting around with an oscilloscope and other tools in the shack with them, and that you're trying to keep them amused, why not show them the multimeter acting as a lie detector? Now, we know that if you take a multimeter on a very high resistance range and you hold the terminals between you in each hand, a terminal in each hand, if you tell a lie, people tend to sweat. They can't help it. If they tell a lie, they tend to sweat just a little bit. And that changes your skim resistance. And the skim resistance, you'll see the needle on the multimeter move. Works better on an analog meter, but it will work on a digital meter. But you can actually see it work. Now, it's not as super fine as a proper lie detector and one thing or another, but it does lead to a bit of fun. And if they're a little bit older, they'll probably understand about skim resistance as well, which is quite a nice thing to talk to them about. Build something. If they're a little bit older, and I've built things with my two in the UK anyway, a Morse buzzer and a simple key. I'm back to Morse again. They'll love to do that. And they get something at the end of it. They get achievement of building it and something at the end of it for a few hours or half an hour, that you spend with them. And it's quality time for you as well. So just enjoy it. Now, the other thing that we sometimes do with the Scouts is we make a night light. And this night light is little more than a 9-volt battery, a white LED, a resistor, a light-dependent resistor, and we put it in a 1-pint plastic milk container that we have in the UK. So basically what you have is that when it all goes dark, the light comes on. And when you're in normal daylight, the LDR is high resistance and the light doesn't come on. And you'd be surprised how many children I've seen pretty much just go into a cupboard to make sure that the light actually comes on when it gets dark. And it's a great thing, it costs literally nothing. Most of this stuff we'll probably have in our junk boxes anyway, but a great bit of fun just to spend some time with your children or your grandchildren, showing them some other bits and pieces. And the last thing I'm going to suggest we can do over the Christmas period, and this is a shameless plug, I know, the Icq Digital Group is having a hub meeting on Wednesday night at midnight, starting in the UK, 00 UTC, midnight going into the 30th of December. So that over that period, and it's for digital radio users. Come join us, come have a chat, tell us what you've been up to, tell us what you've got for Christmas, whatever you fancy. This is a group meeting. It's been chosen at this time just to rotate it a bit so other people are better off with time zones. We look forward to you joining us if you'd like to, and make Christmas and the holiday period a bit of fun. Oh, and one other I've just thought of, and I know I meant to write this down, but I didn't. If you're going to go out and about, guys, you can always take your handy talkie. But if the family's not that interested in amateur radio, why don't you take your handy talkie and have a look at another hobby called geocaching. Now, if you haven't heard of it, geocaching is a nice little hobby where you go off into the countryside, or can be in the town as well, but you go looking for little treasure pots. Okay, we call them treasure pots. They're nothing of major value in them. Usually it's only a logbook. If there's a trinket in there you want, you're supposed to take the trinket out you want and put another one in you don't want. So it keeps the whole thing ticking over. Now, there are geocaches all over the world, and they're very interesting, and they take you to places, even in your local area, where I bet you've never been or even thought about. So have a look at geocaching on the website and sign up. It's free. There is a free option. If you've got a phone with a GPS on it, you're home and dry, and you just go off. You get a coordinates and a clue, and you go off and you look for things. Now, sometimes they will be small sandwich boxes. Sometimes they will look almost like a rivet. A micro one may look like a rivet on a post. But it's great fun, and you can involve a whole group of you going off and doing it. And, all right, you can still do a bit of ham radio with your handy talkie while you're looking for it as well, can't you? Hi. So, just a few ideas to give you something else to do over the Christmas period. If, like me, I'm sure you get fed up watching the same movies over and over again, and everybody's sitting there going, I'm bored, what am I going to do? Well, here's a few ideas for you. I hope those are of use.
Whether it's across the pond or over the channel, the ICQ podcast is international.
Herzlich willkommen in Deutschland. 73 de España.
By amateurs, for amateurs.
Well, there, guys, hopefully something for you all to think about, for you to spend the next couple of weeks doing there. And I say some great ideas there from your dad about, things we can do over the festive season, when hopefully the world will quieten down a little bit and we get to spend a bit of time thinking about our hobbies. Right, we've really appreciated to get some great feedback this episode. So first off, we're going to do a feedback from Roxy Klaus, Kilo 1 Alpha Uniform Sierra. And basically the message is, being curious about the legality of using products like Echolink, D-Star, DMM, etc. for making contacts in a country other than the one you are licensed in. I emailed the RSGB about using remotehams.com to make contacts with, and was told that it was only legal for UK licensed hams to use remotely controlled stations in the UK. Have you done a segment on this in the past? And if not, would you be interested in tackling it for an ICQ segment in the future? Thank you for some interesting podcasts and great discussion information. And that's from Roxy, Kilo 1 Alpha Uniform Sierra. So I know this one's come up a few times, and I do think it's one of those ones where, you do get different answers, different things you speak to, but more importantly, it's more about your licensing conditions. Wouldn't you agree?
Certainly would, Colin. And yes, I would suggest that the RSGB are right. You cannot, or you should not, be a system op or controlling a radio in another country if you're not licensed in that country, or the country doesn't allow you to do that under SEP agreement, depending on your licensing details. Now, outside of that, Echolink, DMR, D-Star, Fusion, WiresX, anything you like, as far as I can understand from my license, as long as I'm using the RF in my country, the country of origin where I have a license, there is no reason why I can't use those to connect to the other side of the world. Now, just for argument's sake, there's nothing to stop a foundation license holder in the UK being able to access the 10-meter repeater in New York, for argument's sake, on HF. He's complying with his license in the UK. He's transmitting, and that's fair. It's no different to having a contact with somebody in another country. But you also have to realise that you have to operate the rules of that country. So as a full licence holder, when I go to Ireland, or when I go to Cyprus, or when I was in the States, your licensing content has to be the one from the country you're in, and you have to obey those rules. That's as clear as anything. So I don't see a problem with somebody getting on Echolink or D-Star or DMR or whatever and having a contact with somebody in another country, because in fairness, you don't know if it's coming out on RF or straight to a computer. You also, you've complied with your licensing agreement and you've connected to something in your country. Now, that could be a mobile phone using DroidStar, and you could be in a country where you've used DroidStar and you've connected to a talk group, and that talk group goes all over the world. I don't see a problem, because you're not doing anything illegal as far as I understand. So that's my fear on that one. And we've covered this a number of times. Whether I'm not so sure we should do it as a feature, but hopefully that clears that one up a little bit, Colin.
Yeah, I know. Remember, we've had conversations with people over the years, and it's pretty much that same thing. Sometimes you get this default position of, well, you can't do X, and then when you actually talk it through and say, well, hang on a second, I'm not actually, transmitting RF there or RF here, and whatever it be. And as Dad explains it, they usually do the long, thoughtful suck of the tooth and go, that does comply with the license conditions. So I think it's as Dad said, it's all about the licensing conditions and where the RF transmits from, which is the most important part in terms of where your RF transmits from. So that's the important part there. So in relation to if you're in the States and you don't have the relevant criteria to control a station in the UK and then transmit RF from that remote station, then obviously that's your breach. But coming into a UK repeater on Echo Link and then continuing out from there is fine, because your RF starts, if you like, in the US, and obviously you're pretty much on like a digital bounce through all the rest of the way. So that's certainly how we understand it from there. So no, look, that's hopefully clears it up from our perspective, from a license perspective. But I think more than anything else, the fact is, I think over a period of time there might be a cleanup of the licensing conditions, where it will talk about these more digital modes and start to discuss what can and can't be done for that. But for the moment, it's all about your RF and where you comply in terms of that. Well, we got some feedback in relation to, as a couple of news stories we've done recently. So, John Rogers contacted us recently in relation to episode 364 and the feature there, and there was a conversation in regarding copper and fiber links, etc. And his very simple comment says, if you replace the copper with fiber, recover the copper and sell it to pay for fiber. So not only is that a smart idea to do that upgrade as well, but as you've had success in the past of getting rid of old cables and power leads, etc., down to your local scrap merchant and making a couple of shekels to reinvest back into the shack in the future as well, haven't you?
Yeah, certainly have, Colin, and it's surprising how much copper's worth at the moment. Unfortunately, there's too many people stealing it off construction sites and things like that. So you will have to prove who you are when you take bags of copper. But all those old copper leads you've got, any bits of cable, coax that the water's got into, whatever. If you box it all up or put it in a bag and you take it down to your local scrap merchant, don't bother to burn all the chemical covered plastics off. Let them do it. They've got the better facilities. They won't give you quite as much money. They'll give you more money if it's just pure copper, but it ain't worth the effort. The amount of time it's going to take you to strip the copper back, just accept it. So, people like the comms companies and network companies, they do need to start thinking about putting fiber in, because it is so much cheaper. And, you can probably run multiple connections over one bit of fiber, whereas with copper, it's single connection, I believe, or limited number of connections anyway. So there you go, Colin.
Yeah, no problem. So now we covered a news story in our last episode in relation to AIS and the Chinese government and law changes in relation to that service there. So Ian McCallum, Mike 0, India, Mike Charlie, gave us his opinion, and he thinks it's to do with the Chinese national security. And his reasoning is the continuing build-up of tensions in the Irish Sea over the disputed islands, areas of sea and controlling of shipping routes, etc. Perhaps the Chinese government are fearful the US Navy will have a hit list of ships if things get worse. So I say it's again, we did touch on some of the ideas. It could be geopolitical in relation to what was going on there. And so interesting for Ian, and thank you very much for your opinion. Rory, November 6th. Oscar India Lima has sent us a link for more information on AIS, where you can find out more information. So it's marinetraffic.com/blogs/AIS-FAQ. But what I will do is I'll also put that link into the show notes for this episode 366 for you, so you can check out that for you at your leisure later on. Right, well, I think that just about wraps up our last show of 2021. Such a weird year it has been, but as I say, we've got for another year produced your shows for you on a fortnightly basis, and hope we've entertained you, and as I say, you've enjoyed those shows along the way. Now, it's a time where we thank our donors again, David Bowie, Zulu Lima 4 Delta Romeo Bravo, and all our monthly subscription donors. And say in this seasonal tide of goodwill and giving, feel free to pop along to icqpodcast.com/donate and show your value for the show by helping us out with our running costs, and by setting up either a subscription donation or a one-off donation to us, which helps us pay our way and keep us wonderfully advert free. And lastly, but more importantly, we'd like to thank the news table contributors this episode, and that's Chris, Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel for joining you, Dad, Martin, and 1MLB on the News Roundtable. Of course, myself, Dad, and all our presenters would like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and seasonal greetings. And to say, if you're not inclined that way, hopefully downtime to enjoy the hobby and to enjoy what you do. So, Dad, I'm now going to send you off with a very special Yuletide task to do. I'm going to suggest that you pop Mrs. B in the car. You take her off to one of those fine Christmas markets and you buy her a lovely cup of hot mulled wine and a mince pie for her to enjoy in this festive time. So I'm going to let you get ready and do that and bid you 73s.
Yeah, okay, Colin. I'm going to spend some time with your mum in a minute and obviously do the right thing, and we will have a nice something nice today, I think. I had actually forgotten it was the last episode before Christmas. Please forgive me, guys. I really did. I'm going to take a bit longer to do this section than Colin probably expected. But, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from all of us at the podcast team here. And hopefully you'll all come into the new year safe and well. So that's one thing. On the digital talk group, we had a bit of a problem earlier in the week where we had a hack attack on one of our servers. That's been solved at the moment. So hopefully you should enjoy. And last but not least, I mentioned it once before on a podcast, we are having a Icq Digital Hub Meeting. Starts at midnight on Wednesday the 29th UTC at 2400, drops into Thursday, and hopefully we'll get to talk to some of you and have a good chat all around the world. I think it's ideal for the States. Phil's just told me, Colin, that although it's daylight where he's going to be at work. So he might not be able to make it, even though we try to make it useful for him as well. So there you go. And I'm off in a second to make Mrs. B a cup of tea, and then we're going to go out and find something nice. So back to you, Colin.
Well, now you've proved this show is completely unscripted, so we will wrap up now. Right, 73's all, and what we'll do is we'll catch up again all in the new year. Enjoy your break, and we'll see you all again in a fortnight's time. 73's all.
Yeah, 73.